Hello there! I'm Ella Sivan Shaul, a Spring 2024 Maven Scholar, and this is my final project. The mysterious man from Into the Woods famously declares, "No knot unties itself." The slogan dares viewers of the richly layered Sondheim Lapine musical to untangle the show's overlapping plot points, character arcs, and themes. Its distinctive use of characters already familiar to the audience brings narrative and thematic advantages, creating a magic that almost defies description. As the audience is already familiar with the characters, they require minimal introduction. This leaves time for the musical to focus on plot and deeper relationships. For instance, this is the concise introduction to Into the Woods.
Once upon a time,
I wish
in a far-off kingdom,
more than anything,
lived a fair maiden,
more than life,
a sad young lad,
more than jewels, I wish,
and a childless baker,
more than life,
I wish, with his wife,
more than anything,
more than the moon.
And then there was a hungry little girl who always wore a red cape.
I wish.
Imagine the length of the show or what plot points would have to be cut if Sondheim and Lapine had to familiarize theatergoers with all of this. The use of pre-existing and widely known characters allows for a subversion of expectations, as viewers learn about unexpected context around them. This follows a key theater axiom that surprise is compelling, engaging the audience and interesting them in how characters develop from their familiar states. The audience has pre-existing outlooks on these characters and needs to loosen them to become involved in the story. For Into the Woods, this acts as a parallel for one of the lessons of the musical, that even fairy tales aren't always predictable, and that there isn't necessarily safety in familiarity. As in most iterations, Cinderella goes to the ball or festival because she wants to enjoy it, rather than seeking out the love of her prince. Here, though, rather than finding a dedicated love beneath her prince's charm, Into the Woods' prince turns out to be pompous and egotistical. After their marriage, Cinderella's prince cheats on her with the baker's wife, and they end up separating, rather than living together happily ever after. Due to her traditional story, viewers expect Little Red's takeaway to be wariness and caution, but in this iteration she is feisty and becomes more defensive with her knife. The lessons she takes here are of being aware and prepared, subverting her story's tropes as well as general female European folk tropes. This reinvention also seems to have set the tone for succeeding iterations of Little Red Riding Hood. Additionally, the audience then expects her to learn her lesson and live happily with her family after her traditional story concludes early in Act 1, but instead she is orphaned and the lesson she learned from her own fairy tale couldn't even protect her family. The intentional subversion of Rapunzel's story in Into the Woods comes from her prince's unfaithfulness and Rapunzel's lunacy and death. What's more, using the witch, presumably Dame Gothel, taken from Rapunzel's storyline, rather than a traditional Hansel and Gretel type hag, is interesting, since the witch in the original tale subverts common folk tropes in and of itself, by wanting to raise Rapunzel rather than eat her.
This is the world I meant. Couldn't you listen? Couldn't you stay?
Additionally, I would venture to say that Rapunzel is widely known today, mainly from Disney's Tangled, which was released 23 years after Into the Woods. It is therefore interesting to look at her journey in Into the Woods from an audience perspective at a different point in time to when it was first produced, and to consider how character choices may be perceived years after they were established. For instance, those viewers who were really only familiar with Rapunzel from Tangled will have found her pregnancy most unexpected, even though in versions of her original story, the witch discovers that Rapunzel is familiar with the prince because of her pregnancy, so this is drawn from the source. I found this intriguing to consider, bearing in mind that today's societal baseline for Cinderella, for instance, is Disney's 1950 Cinderella, which was released before Into the Woods and was therefore intentionally used to play into the subversion of character expectations for her character. Using the examples of these three characters in Into the Woods, we can see purposeful subversions of audience expectations and how they contribute to the show's themes of the unpredictability of life, disillusionment, and resilience in the face of unanticipated hardships. Therefore, the benefits of using pre-existing and widely known characters in musicals include
1,
the opportunity to start with a further baseline of audience knowledge and
2,
add depth to the plot,
3,
the ability to surprise audiences with unexpected interpretations, and
4.
the capacity to draw in audiences familiar with the characters due to name recognition. But can these characters be detrimental to a show? They make it easy for a librettist to fall into the trap of referencing too many aspects of the original source material unnecessarily. We see this often in prequels of all mediums. For instance, in The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings is shoehorned in, although he is not involved in its story at all. This type of superfluous addition distracts from the main plot and becomes about fan service rather than story.
He is known in the wild as Strider. His true name, you must discover for yourself.
Thankfully, this pitfall was avoided in our model of Into the Woods thanks to the masterful work of James Lapine. The only segment that teeters close to this pitfall is in the Agony reprise, where both Sleeping Beauty and Snow White are referenced, but I believe that this theoretically superfluous addition serves the story by highlighting the ridiculousness of the princes and the extent of their entitlement towards all women.
High in a tower, like yours was, but higher, a beauty asleep. I found a casket entirely of glass. No, it's unbreakable. Inside, don't ask it, a maiden, alas, just as unwakeable. She has skin white as snow.
Additionally, as with shows that are heavily influenced by source material, problems may be posed by technological limitations that make it difficult to meet the visual expectations of an audience. However, this can be used as an opportunity for creativity rather than a problem that just has to be overcome, leading to ingenuities such as the construction of the giantess in Into the Woods. So, after singing the praises of established characters in Into the Woods, why are the central characters the original Baker and his wife? As non-established characters, the audience doesn't have an initial connection with them and has to build it throughout the show as with traditional musicals. Well, in a sea of familiar faces, the baker and his wife offer the audience a typical musical couple to latch onto, as traditional fairy tale structures crumble all around them. However, just as the comfort of predictable fairy tales lends itself to the twists doled out by Into the Woods, the tantalizing security of an archetypal couple is ripped out from under an audience that have anchored themselves onto this couple. Their story, though original, feels quite traditional, and when their journey is over, they get their wish and go off at the end of Act 1 to live happily ever after, just as the established characters do in another fairy tale ending. In Act 2, past the point in Into the Woods where all the other characters' stories have taken turns for the worse, the baker and his wife persevere and lead the plans to resolve the problems incurred by the arrival of the giantess. The audience starts to feel that this more realistic couple takes action, while the fairy tale characters are helpless, and that this could be the moral of the show. Lulled into a false sense of security by what they've subconsciously labeled as constant protagonists, viewers then have the rug swept out from under them as two unfathomable subversions occur. Aside from the collapse of the final pillar of stability in the musical, the special impact of these events hits hard due to their disorienting proximity to one another and because there can be no resolution or explanation between the baker and his wife regarding her infidelity. These final subversions are the nail in the coffin for the audience's stability. Untethered, they have to lurch blindly toward the end of the show and hope for the best with nothing to base that hope on, just as people must in life. The lessons learned by both the established and non-established characters couldn't help them in Act 2. In conclusion, Into the Woods' masterful management of this unique concept led to the complex masterpiece that continues to thrill audiences and performers alike. The magical execution of subversions of expectations and character parallels laced with hard-hitting themes has resulted in a rightful keystone of the musical theater canon.
Magic that defies description.
The harder to wait, the better to have.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Marquee is a free weekly Broadway appreciation newsletter with essays, reviews, piano talks, Broadway blasts, quizzes, and more. Sign up for the complimentary or premium edition and learn about all classes and projects at thebroadwaymaven.com. And here's a Sondheim video playlist.